Otto Dix was a machine gunner, an aerial observer during the war. What does this mean? Well, as a machine gunner, he's going to see bodies piling up, especially when they adopt the Ludendorff defensive positions. And he's going to see those bodies pile up on a regular basis. Of course, they're constantly going over the top and trying to fight each other for these trenches that they never really move all that much. Now, as an aerial observer, he's going to get the chance to look down at no man's land and really have a view of it that few other soldiers would have. These aerial observer aircraft are not flying that high. They're using binoculars. They're trying to call in artillery at times. Other times they're acting as reconnaissance. But this gives him an interesting view of everything going on. Using all of this information, he will paint Der Krieg. Now, this is a very problematic piece later on, but we'll get to that. Now, this captures the devastation of war, both on the terrain as well as on the humans. Now, he's using a triptych form, something that we're used to as an altarpiece, but it's a visual juxtaposition. Of course, what he's showing you is anything but religious. It's almost the opposite. It is man's savagery and brutality coming out on the canvas. And everything we see here is something that we know to be truth at some level. So let's start digging through it. As we start on the left, what you see is the patriotic new soldiers going to war. This could be in 1914 as the war starts. This could be later, 1915, 16, because no one goes to war thinking they're going to die. You usually get real proud. We're really good at building up soldiers and saying, this is what's going to happen. You're going to serve the motherland or the fatherland. You're going to go out and make sacrifices and be heroic. But we usually don't tell you in basic, hey, by the way, there's a really good chance you die. Now, the center panel is particularly brutal. This shows the trenches, warfare in place, warfare as it happens. And what you're seeing is a lot of tropes that the soldiers would have been quite familiar with. And here I'm going to pull up my pen and dig into a few of them. Here we have a body, this angel of death that seems to be caught up on some parts of a building. That actually happens. You have artillery that goes off and throws people into trees or other things, and they get caught there. And sometimes they die there. Sometimes we're throwing their body, which may have been buried by other shells 2 years earlier. The remains of them are being thrown up into trees. Imagine that. Imagine seeing that and what kind of impact that would have on you. We see this in Flanders and elsewhere. We see a man who we're not sure if he's alive or dead. And that happens a lot. With the gas mask and everything else, you can't always tell. Maybe he was shot by a sniper and there's a single bullet wound, but it's impossible to see whether he's dead or alive. We have all of these body parts as well as the legs sticking up. This is really common. Again, at Ypres, at Flanders, at Verdun, we see the same thing. So what happens is, especially in these areas where the battle lines don't shift much, someone will be killed in combat in no man's land. They aren't going to go out and get him. They leave him there. I mean, they're dead anyway. It doesn't matter. And eventually, another shell lands close and maybe throws that body up. And maybe that's someone you knew, a friend of yours from your first tour. And now you're on your third. And the legs and the body parts, anything that sticks up above the ground is shot up because the machine guns don't care. The rifles don't care. They're just going to shoot through it. And so we have these bodily remains being thrown and rained over the troops, especially as we move later in the war. We have people or body parts that appear to be stuck on barbed wire. Every soldier hates barbed wire at the time because you would go over the top across no man's land and get caught in the barbed wire. And even though it's just catching your body, you might not be pierced to death or anything like that. It slows you down enough for the rifle to get you or the machine gun to get you. As you look into the background, this is no man's land. What starts before the war, often as a forest or a tranquil field, will become nothingness. It will become a moonscape. where the shell holes become the only cover that's out there and people die regularly out there. You go over the top, you will die. It's kind of known. The soldiers all know it. As we move to the far right panel, we see this ghostly figure pulling someone out with a massive head wound. And this may actually be the idea that there is no hope for salvation. There's only death and decay awaiting the proud soldiers. Here, he may have actually depicted himself dragging a soldier to safety. But there, you see, there's no salvation. There's no heroism. It appears that he's just pulling a dead body. And is it really heroic to recover a body when there's so many others out there? So he's calling into question the whole idea of morality, and in the background we have this red vortex, almost like the gates of hell opening up and awaiting Dix and his fellow soldiers as they die. Below, what would normally be a depiction of, for example, Joseph under the crucifixion, where Joseph has died prior to the crucifixion. Here instead, we see German soldiers dead. Now, they weren't being buried like this. This is a sleeping bunker. So in the trenches, what you would have is you have a whole series of trenches. So there will be 6, 7 trenches deep. But as you move a little bit further towards the back, the second, third line, what you would do is you would have your trench, and then you would dig into the back, dig into the side. And here we would have a space for sleeping. The idea is it's fairly safe. If a shell lands right here, you're probably just fine because there's 6 feet of earth. But it's also incredibly claustrophobic and horrific when you look at it. So here we have a cloth that would catch any dirt and dust falling through the boards above them, but we see the soldiers are particularly pale. They've died here. How? A shell probably landed in the trench or very close by and buried it. And now they can't get out this way, and there is no other way out. They would be packed in. There might be 10 soldiers in here, all asleep, and they will asphyxiate either in their sleep or in a panic when they wake up. It's like waking up in a coffin. This is people's worst nightmare, and this is common. This is war that Dix is trying to show us. So when we look at the whole thing, the idea in this work, and really all of this work, is to show the brutality and the insanity of war. Even although they also wanted to remind the German people of the horrors, so such things would not happen again in the future. And let me remind you that this piece is being finished in 1929 to 32, which means the Nazis are coming to power at the end of 1932, early 1933. Dix and this piece barely survived the war. This is exactly the sort of thing that the Germans don't want their people to see. They don't want to see the brutality of war. They want to talk about patriotism and heroics. They don't want to talk about the possibility of dying, of loss, of wounding. And so it becomes this piece that is cast aside. It becomes part of the degenerate art shows that we see in Germany after the war. Before the war in 1937. So it's a remarkable piece. It's a powerful piece by Dix, but it's the kind of thing that gets him remembered in art history, but cast aside during his life. He will be cast aside as an artist in Germany. And it's all because he's being so honest and so brutal in his depictions of the World War I trenches.